Welcome everyone to today's webinar, launching the LSO Solution Provider Landscape Report. I'm Stan Hubbard, Principal Analyst at Mplify and the report author. The report is sponsored by Amartis and is available for free to members of the Mplify community. It can also be purchased by non-Mplify members through our website. The main message today is that LSO adoption has reached global scale, and the industry's focus is shifting from basically shifting from adoption towards implementation depth, scaling partner ecosystems, transaction models, API-enabled automation, payload coverage, and AI-ready coordination. This webinar explores how solution providers are helping service providers build out scalable, interoperable automation ecosystems for NAS and AI-ready infrastructure. Just a few housekeeping items before I introduce the speakers. The industry report, the presentation, recording, and the slides are available, and they will be made. We will provide links to them after the webinar is over. We utilize the chat during this event, so if you want to send a question, you can send it to me or you can send it to Tom. He's monitoring the chat area. And then follow-up questions or feedback you can send directly to me at stan@mplify.net. I'm pleased to be joined today by experts from LSO solution providers. We have Michael Kearns from Amartis, Devesh Gupta from PCCW Global. Devesh is also co-chair of Mplify's Test and Certification Committee. We have John Denemark from TransUnion, Greg Tilton from Netcracker and CSG, and Miguel Piaquadio from Orchest. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Stan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stan.
Here's how we'll structure today's discussion. LSO adoption has reached global scale, so our focus is on what comes next, how the industry scales implementation depth. We'll start with a quick look at the report findings and the 5 dimensions that shape LSO implementation maturity. Then we'll move into service provider perspectives, why partner ecosystem growth matters, where direct APIs are delivering value, and the biggest challenges to adoption. From there, we'll look at transaction models from both buy and sell side views. We'll then discuss how API-enabled lifecycle automation and payload coverage are expanding across more services and operational domains. Finally, we'll look ahead to automation maturity, MCP, and AI-ready NAS, and what still requires broader ecosystem alignment. Before we get into the report findings, I want to briefly place this work in the broader context of the Mplify research program. The LSO Solution Provider Landscape Report is the first step in a 3-part research progression for 2026. The October report will go deeper into ecosystem-wide LSO adoption as we explore how providers are scaling NAS automated network service supply chains. Amartis is also a sponsor of that report. The November report will then extend the analysis into NAS for AI and AI-ready infrastructure, an area that is emerging as a new competitive battleground, and PCCW Global is one of the sponsors for that report. This slide summarizes the key findings. The adoption numbers at the bottom are context only. The deeper adoption analysis comes in the next report. For this report, the central finding is that LSO implementation depth varies across the ecosystem. Providers differ by partner scale, SDK and API alignment, transaction models, payload support, and automation maturity and AI readiness. Those differences shape deployment complexity, partner onboarding, and readiness for multi-provider automation. A second major finding is that solution providers are central to scaling. They help abstract integration complexity and support both direct and indirect implementation models. Third, scaling depends on multiple transaction models. Direct APIs are expanding, but adapters, portals, broker and hub models, multi-party coordination, and customized integration all help broaden participation. Fourth, automation is expanding beyond the initial business API focus on address validation, product offering qualification, quote, and order, toward more complete lifecycle automation, including operational functions between partners. And finally, AI readiness makes standardization even more important. MCP, AI agents, and AI-enabled orchestration extend LSO-based automation, but they still depend on standardized APIs, processes, and payload models. Let's take a moment to set the scene when it comes to LSO adoption. I track more than 175 service providers around the world through what we call the adoption lifecycle. That's everything from interest through to product deployment. More than 100 service providers are committed or in production based on this research, with 58 to 60 in production as sellers and/or buyers. We'll be updating our numbers following extensive proprietary research for our October report, but there are a few observations we can make now. So Michael and Devesh and I talked about some of these observations prior to this webinar, and I'd like to give you guys a chance to elaborate on what you're on the topic here. So maybe Michael, if you want to take it, and then Devesh.
Yeah, thank you, Stan. I think it's to put some context on these numbers, right? So we might look at, say, 58 providers in production today and moving to 100 over the next year or two. But what does it mean? I think the most important thing is coverage in terms of global coverage. We started the journey to automate the international wholesale, and if you look around the globe today, there are some countries which are fully covered. So, for example, Italy is fully covered. We have very good coverage in Canada. We have very good coverage in Belgium. We have very good coverage in the UK, and in LATAM particularly. And I think that 58, 60 actually represents way more providers, because in some cases you're talking about providers who are aggregating other providers in country. And even there, I think when you update your numbers, you're going to find some surprises, because those who've implemented those APIs as well are naturally using those in the domestic markets for their own purposes and their own customers. So there's a lot more happening more organically on that side. If we look at the 100 number, I think the drivers there and the increase is going to happen around really the next movement in terms of NAS is for operators to look at how they automate their multi-provider ecosystem. So they've traditionally been focused on-net services, and even stretching to the cloud. But when it comes to automating off-net part, which is required for the enterprise customers, this is the next phase of NAS that most providers are there. And of course, AI is also requiring end-to-end automation, not just on a single provider's network, but across the provider's ecosystem of partners as well.
Very good observations. Devesh?
Yeah, just to add to what Michael said, so we're at PCCW Global integrated with a whole lot of other service providers, carriers, who we connect with for downstream last mile connectivity, for instance. And I think we've seen probably upwards of 40, 50 or more integrations where we are able to connect with providers for quotes. But I think the push here, the 42 plus that you're showing there, Stan, is basically, I think we're trying to push also for increased LSO adoption for order and post-order services, right? So that's where I think the story here is that our enterprise customers, they're looking for end-to-end when they provision services on our network. And that end-to-end can only come if we have backend APIs ready with the partners. So that's what I'm seeing, that international wholesale service providers like us and many more, they're kind of asking the domestic solution providers or wholesale providers to adapt LSO and then extend automation all the way from quote to order. The other driver is, I think, of course, sovereign AI and distributed AI workloads, where we are pushing data onto edges. And again, there is a requirement for extension beyond the DC to DC into the edge. So those are two drivers, I would say, which are pushing greater adoption.
Great. Yeah, good observations. The other thing I would add, and we'll cover this more when we get into the payloads, is a growing number of payloads, right? The initial deployments were primarily around Ethernet, but we've got DIA, broadband, internet access, and so forth. So we'll cover that a little bit later.
And one thing, Stan, sorry, forgot to mention is really we're seeing momentum in the US. for sure around LSO adoption now.
Yeah.
So I think that's, it's been a while that it's been coming. There's some level of adoption, but I think we're seeing a much greater emphasis
That is true.
emphasis on that,
Yeah,
you know.
the market
Yeah.
was primarily outside of the US, and there's growing interest and activity here in the US. Good points.
Okay, thanks.
To make the findings more useful, the report organizes the implementation depth around 5 dimensions. So you'll hear these quite often going forward. So ecosystem participation, API-enabled lifecycle automation, transaction models, payload support, and automation maturity and AI readiness. These dimensions help explain why adoption numbers alone do not tell the full story. Providers may be adopting LSO, but they differ in the partner scale, the API and SDK alignment, that's quite important, obviously, the transaction approach that we'll cover in detail here, and then the payload coverage and readiness for the broader lifecycle automation and AI-enabled coordination. So the report uses these dimensions not just as a discussion framework, but as a way to map the LSO solution provider capabilities. So we have 5 LSO solution providers represented here. We have an additional 5 that are covered in the report. So we thank all of the companies for providing the data that underpins this report. So before we move on into the panel discussion, I want to briefly show how the LSO solution provider matrix captures those capabilities. This matrix is an evidence layer behind the discussion. It summarizes support across the transaction models, buy and sell side enablement, business and operational automation, AI and MCP related enablement. The broader report also includes detailed views of the API and payload support for each of these companies. So it goes quite a bit more in depth in those areas. It is not meant to be a simple ranking. It's a way to show implementation depth and direction of support across the different providers and the models. That matters because providers are not solving the same problem in the same way. Some need direct API integration, some need adapters, portals, and hub models. Some are focused on business APIs today, while others are beginning to extend into the operational area, expand their payloads, and so forth. So with that context, one more thing I wanted to say about this. In the second report, we'll take basically a similar approach in collecting the data, right? So we'll be able to go through the service providers and have a similar approach. So you'll be able to identify, are they using direct implementations? Are they using different transaction models? Have they implemented the APIs on the buy and sell side? What APIs do they support? What SDKs do they support? So that data will be collected as well. And I think it'll be a rich set of data going forward. So this slide makes the framework more concrete. A service provider may be selling automated services to enterprises, other providers, data centers, or other buy-side customers and partners. At the same time, that provider may be buying from downstream ecosystem partners, access providers, the data center players, etc. Before we get into the individual transaction models, I want to start with a practical question. What motivates implementation in the first place? What benefits are providers seeing and what challenges emerge when they try to scale? So maybe going back to the provider perspective, Devesh, if you could take that, maybe Michael and then Miguel, just kind of walk through what it motivates providers to adopt LSO. Oh, Devesh, you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I was saying, the traditional drivers, the better, faster, cheaper, are still predominantly the large drivers for LSO adoption. So when I say that, basically better customer experience for real-time quote or real-time order visibility or even post-order visibility, that's a must for enterprise providers or enterprise customers who are buying NAS services these days. Faster response for quotes, for example, down from days to a few seconds because mostly it's instant quotes these days. And then cheaper operation in terms of the amount of revenue cost or time spent in order to turning around quotes goes down with automation. So those remain the key drivers, but then also scalability. If you have volumes of information exchange and a lot of quote requests coming in every day, every week, I think the scalability is a key thing that drives the adoption of LSO because it makes it that much more simpler to respond to a large number of requests. And then the new age drivers are mainly, you're with the agentic workflow, service providers have started operating and implementing agents. And in many cases, it's like either pricing assistance or ordering assistance, and in some cases, network support assistance. They're all going to be needing some kind of backend automation. So basically, LSO APIs, they're underpinning all of that AI, native AI orchestration. So those would be the new drivers which are going to drive all this adoption between two parties.
So Michael, you're working with quite a few companies that are strategically committed to NAS. I know that you and I have talked about that as an important one, but do you want to elaborate on that one?
Yeah, just I suppose just before we get into that, just on the main driver in the wholesale is around the buyers really in terms of the buyers, requiring the needing to be able to quote quickly and then beyond quote process the steps beyond that into order and even operational side. Um, in terms of NAS, obviously I mentioned earlier in the question you had asked me. I think with NAS, if it doesn't ultimately address the end-to-end services, between the customer sites and the full services that the enterprise customer has, basically it falls short of what the expectation is. So, in order to do that, and NAS is about self-service, it's about speed, it's about being responsive, being able to upgrade and downgrade your services quickly, change your services, move them. You have to have API-driven interactions with your downstream suppliers in order to be able to achieve that, and that is across the board. So I think that's a key driver for NAS providers in their next phase of evolution. They need to be able to extend and automate their ecosystem, and LSO is a fantastic way to do that in standardizing and offering that consistent experience to the customers and
Yeah.
with the suppliers.
And when we're talking about NAS, people usually think of it as the NAS retail provider, right? Facing the business customer. But coming out of ITW, you get more discussion about wholesale providers positioning around NAS capabilities too. So it's about plugging and playing within that NAS automated ecosystem, right? Um,
Yeah, and one very important thing, Stan, just about that, if you have women, I think many wholesale providers are obviously trying to sell their on-net services, but many are actually aggregating off-net services from their local partners. So, in order to give that quote quickly, for example, back to the upstream customer, they need to automate end-to-end across, not only the on-net, but with the off-net partners, basically.
yeah. So Miguel, based on your implementation experience, what motivates providers to begin the journey, and maybe how do you see things, once they get going, what do they discover
Yes,
from
and
working with partners?
from what we see, I think providers usually start with LSO journey looking for a way to scale their commercial activity and improve their customer experience. In our case, we see that the LSO business APIs as one of the most powerful opportunities. We know that wholesale telecom is a business with a relatively low quote to close ratios, which means providers need to generate and manage a very large amount of opportunities in order to win business. So the ability to automate qualification and quoting through APIs allows providers to exponentially increase the number of opportunities they can process without adding headcount. However, once providers move beyond the first implementation, they quickly discover that the challenge is no longer the API itself. The bigger challenge becomes like operational scalability. They need consistent product catalogs, standardized workflows, and the ability to coordinate multiple suppliers and partners through a common process. That's what Michael was mentioning. It's completely I completely agree with him. And the organizations that are most successful are the ones that view the LSO not only as a technology standard, but as a framework for scaling multi-provider automation and creating a more consistent customer experience, basically.
Yeah, very, very well said. Yeah, it's all about being able to integrate and scale within that ecosystem. Excellent points. So John and Greg, I'd like to work you guys in, but then we can come back to Devesh and Michael on the transaction models. But just want to dive into this a little bit. So John, you've got experience with direct implementations and adapters, including sitting in the middle between large providers looking to make that transition to LSO or actually in the process. So what happens when partners want to participate in that automation, but they're not ready for the direct API integration?
Yeah, sure, Stan. Let me take that one, and thank you for including us in this. We're happy to be here and appreciate the opportunity to talk about our solutions. So, as you said, we're a solutions provider, and we sit in the middle. We sit in between our buy side customers and their suppliers, and our sell side customers and their customers. And so what we see in this ecosystem is that our customers on both sides are really interested in the things that the other folks here have been saying. They're interested in improving their customers' experience, shortening cycle times, getting faster to revenue, and scaling their business, right? And what we've seen is that there is the ecosystem has a lot of different variety in it, right? There are different APIs for different things. For example, you guys talked about already address validation, there's quoting, there's ordering. On the ordering side, I think the ecosystem is a little bit underserved by API. On the quote side, I think this is pretty well developed. But given the diversity of the way that business gets done between all the different carriers out there, there is a need to sort of interpret and map to between them. And that's what we do with our UOC platform and our UOC products. We are actually providing and integrating all these different all the different standards and sort of the custom ways that people do business. So for example, we're able to take an ASOG-based order. This is specific to the US, but there is something called an ASR or ASOG standard that's been the legacy standard, and translate that into an LSO based order, and vice versa, right? And so the benefit that our customers get from this approach is that we can integrate LSO into the existing ecosystem. And if, for example, they're not ready to develop their own LSO-based APIs, we provide that as part of our solution. And then we can expose that to their customers, or we can use that to order on their behalf with carriers with their partners that use LSO on the sell side. So there's a lot of translation. There's a lot of order enrichment. There's a lot of workflow standardization in our solution to make it all work together in a more seamless way.
Very good. So Greg, you've had the opportunity to work with service providers, including a tier 1 global provider that's implemented APIs directly on the buy side. Can you give us an idea of the scope of that kind of work and some of the challenges they have and what they're looking to address with that?
Yes,
Or,
I think so.
or elaborate on the topic overall. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, the product that I represent is a CPQ that's focused on complex B2B for telcos, and so the product is really to enable enterprise focused business units within telcos to then quote and order solutions to their customers. And as a part of forming those solutions, you need to integrate in often access from a variety of different partners. And to better facilitate that, we provide out of the box support for these APIs to allow them to plug those suppliers in and use those as overall in those solutions. And there's I guess there are a range of challenges. Firstly, we're really focused on the buy side, not the sell side, and there's been a real focus, I think, to date heavily on the sell side, particularly, and certifications being quite sell side focused. And we kind of represent the other side of the equation, being the buy. So there are challenges in, well, how do you test it? How do you certify it? How do you then ensure that interoperability? Obviously, we're built to the spec, Also, as a catalog-driven product, where we like to have like to be able to support different variations in the product payloads, and the MEF product payloads are a really powerful construct for standardization in their own right. But sometimes in the market, there'll be different providers, product managers will decide that they'll offer things differently and not necessarily follow those MEF product specs. That should be no reason not to actually use the APIs. So I think that's having some support for that flexibility is important also.
Yeah, that's a really important point. In the report we discussed that how you can use the APIs with, our goal is to have, the use with standardized product payloads. But as we go through that process, you've got companies that are sort of working with pre-standard or in progress standards based API payloads. So we go into detail on that and also show the different support for the payloads from the LSO solution providers. Let me circle back to Devesh and then Michael. Devesh, you've got a certain solution that you've introduced into the market, that Mplify's highlighted, the open source solution. And Michael, maybe if you could talk a little bit about what you're doing in this area.
So, yeah, thanks for that question. So basically, first, what I would say is this model that you put out there, it's kind of very accurately depicts how we are positioned in the market today. We operate a Console Connect NAS platform, which sits right in the middle. And so we have the sell side integrations with enterprises who's largely coming through the web portal, but with service providers and data center operators, which are often integrated through APIs. And on our buy side, we are connected with ecosystem partners to cloud on-ramp to a hyperscaler or to a last mile provider for extending access from DC to DC beyond DC to DC to the edge, right? So it kind of accurately depicts our integration scenario currently. We're tracking in excess of 100 partners that we connect for last mile, over 900 plus data centers that we connect for our backend automation. Now, in terms of the API integration, we have three tiers, three being the loosely coupled one, and then two and one being the tightly coupled layer. So when I say tightly coupled, it's basically we're directly integrated with them. So it's the direct connect model. And then that goes in with multiple LSO processes, right from address validation, quote order, going into even inventory or ticketing. Whereas the loosely coupled one, the tier three one, might only touch one or two business processes, mainly, I think, address and quote validation. So what I would say is in terms of the models, the tightly coupled, the direct integration is much better, or basically it can get much deeper. The loosely coupled ones normally are either through a aggregator of sorts, so we can or we could use the LSO standard. Either way, it kind of then speeds up the process for integration with multiple partners. Yeah. And we came up with an LSO adapter, which was brought into open source about a year and a half back. We're using that for regional providers, last mile providers, which often provide either a non-standard API or they have a old version of the Mplify API. So we can actually use the adapter just to map those non-standard APIs back to LSO and then bring them onto our platform. So that's where we're based in this.
So basically a migratory step to help them get engaged more.
Yeah, so it kind of
into the
reduces their
community.
effort in terms of not redoing their APIs. So if you put an adapter in front of whatever you have, you can map it to a given Amplify standard, and then it works for us. We don't have to redo that again, for connecting to multiple partners.
Yeah. So Michael, big question providers have is when they make, what makes business sense to implement APIs directly versus using adapters and so forth. Maybe if you could touch on that, the motivation to choose one way or the other, and then talk a little bit about your options there.
Yeah, I think we've learned it over time as well. What was what was required, as we went out to the market and worked with different providers, whether they're NAS providers serving the enterprise B2B market or wholesale providers, buyers and sellers. And what we saw also was that a lot depends on the type of business and the level of and volume of business you're going to do with those partners. So I would say direct integration between partners is largely where there's a decent volume of business and you can afford to do the integration effort between your systems. Of course, you also have to have systems on both sides. The buyer has to have systems and the seller has to have systems. And that wasn't always the case. So we found that, in some cases we needed to stand up a system for either a buyer or seller. So we implemented buy and sell side applications. There were full-blown implementations of LSO processes that would give a quick way for partners to onboard and interact with each other. And then over time, they could start to, as their BSS OSS comes on stream, they could start to integrate with their BSS and OSS. So there was a decoupling of that time frame in terms of how to get them on board, how to get them interacting, and basically how much automation they could drive into their front office or back office systems. Another thing I think is that around this aggregator sort of indirect side, I think it's perfectly, normal to use an aggregator to get access to suppliers, particularly where you need to get access to, smaller suppliers with smaller volumes and with no systems. And I think that is one kind of form of hybrid, I will call it. So direct and indirect using aggregators. But in fact, as we move towards network as a service, we must cover the full life cycle. So you can even have for one single provider, you could be using an aggregator for some of the functions like getting the initial quotes, but then when you want to go to order, when you want to go to trouble ticketing, etc., you may have to do a direct integration with them to achieve the outcome that you expect and need from a turnaround times in terms of requests and more on-demand type capabilities.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I know in the past you've also talked about harmonization, right? So I'm just we don't have to dive into it here, but one of the issues is if you're using these multiple different approaches, how do you harmonize across that, right? But
Well, that's what just to jump in. It's a great point because a lot of the carriers have multiple different APIs for different reasons, right? And so at least on our side, what our customers are looking for is they're looking for a partner that will make all that work, right? Make it all work. So that they don't have to build out to the separate legacy APIs individually in the context of having hundreds of partners, right? And so that's where that harmonization process comes in, and that's where I think some of the solution providers here can really add value.
Miguel, what would you say are some of the most important lessons learned when it comes to implementation partners?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest one is that there's no single implementation model that works for every provider. I mean, direct API integrations create a tremendous value when you have a strategic partners, higher transaction volumes, and a clear business case for deeper automation. But at the same time, especially in regions like LATAM, the level of automation adoption varies significantly. Many providers are still early in their automation journey. So indirect models such as adapters, portals, and translation layers play an important role in expanding participation without requiring every partner to be fully API enabled from day one. Another important lesson is that the success depends as much on operational alignment as it does on technology. We have seen situations where the APIs work perfectly, but the real challenges came from difference in workflows, product definitions, operational ownerships, and or lifecycle processes between the organizations. We think that ultimately the goal is not to simply connect the systems, but to create a scalable model for doing business with important partners.
Yeah, those are very good points. And on that operational front and looking at the broader adoption, we're going to dive more into that in the second report, looking more at the business case and the challenges. So that'll be an important area of exploration in the next report coming up. So the next question is what these models are really being used to automate. Which APIs, lifecycle functions, and operational process are gaining traction. The business APIs remain the most mature area today, especially the ones we just got through talking about. But as providers scale implementation depth, the discussion is really increasingly moving towards a broader lifecycle execution. I think Devesh, I think you mentioned inventory. Then we talk about the operational service order, the performance, the trouble ticket, the assurance, the operational coordination across partners. So this slide illustrates 21 business and operational APIs that have been standardized by Mplify, and we've got some additional work going on. But Greg, just wanted to throw this question out to you. Which LSO APIs are you seeing the strongest pull today, and what do you expect? How do you expect this to evolve on the buy side?
Oh, look, address validation and product offering availability discovery it is key. Like, I mean, the buyers are wanting to be able to essentially browse or find what suppliers have available for as offers, and then product ordering and product inventory lay in, as quite heavily utilized. I think over time we'll see a fuller set of these APIs, but we're really seeing those as the core at this stage. We've got a bit of implementation, a bit of use of the quote API, which is very very similar to order, but for the purposes of getting a quote. But really, it's that address validation, product offering, availability discovery, product order, product inventory.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
So Michael, you've got obviously experience with the business APIs, but also activity around performance monitoring. Maybe if you could say what you think are going to be some of the key
Yeah,
trends.
I think it's and it's quite important now. It's quite timely that we talk about the operational APIs. We have some implementation experience. Actually, we drove the development of the standard around performance monitoring, is particularly for SATCOM providers. And the idea was to standardize the service specification or the performance specifications, where you've got diverse vendor solutions being offered, but like essentially to your customer, you want to present a common model and specifications by being able to stream data, directly into their NOCs, basically. So, for example, within the satellite, where they're serving a large customer like a cruise ship operator, it's very critical if there's 5,000 people on that ship that, you have, right up to the minute awareness of what the performance of your satellite services are. But beyond that, we're also seeing, from a NAS perspective, or just NAS for business, that, in order, as I mentioned, to fulfill the full vision of NAS, you need to look at the 360 life cycle. So that's very important, and that would include all of the operational aspects, beyond once we've got the ordering piece done. And I think AI and AI, network for AI is going to be less forgiving about things like performance, and there's going to have to be much higher levels of monitoring. And this isn't just on your own network. If you're a single provider, it's actually on the network of your partners as well, end to end. So I think these are some of the new drivers we're seeing at the moment in terms of
Very good point on that last one. And we dove into some of that issue when we did the NAS for agentic AI, NAS being the automated supply chain for that. But we'll certainly explore that more in the upcoming reports. But very good points. John, one of the practical issues is that API maturity is uneven. we talked about this across partners and functions. How should providers avoid those gaps becoming blockers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a challenge across the board, and a challenge with just trying to standardize the way that the business is done in this ecosystem is I think because some of these differences in the way that carriers are implementing either the LSO APIs or their own APIs and the way they do business is a result of how exactly their internal processes and their internal systems. And in many ways, they then expose some of the limitations or the requirements of their internal processing out to the industry. And so that then leads to sort of different implementations or partial implementations of the standards or the APIs. And so again, I think you guys talked about harmonization earlier and the way just kind of pulling it all together and quote unquote making it work. That's where I think the solution providers can help, is because of the different approaches to doing business and the different maturity on the service provider side. The solution provider should really be able to step in and make it work for their customers. Their buy side customers, they might have, the buy side carriers might have hundreds of partners, right? Sell side providers have hundreds of customers. How does all that come together? That's where the solution provider should be able to step in and make it work for their customers.
Yep, very good point. That's why we're bringing this community together, right?
Yeah, I think it's a great step. Yeah.
So, Miguel, what would you say is the key trend in the CALA region when it comes to the business functions and the operational functions? What do you expect to see there?
Yeah, I mean, from a LATAM or a CALA perspective, we think we're still in a very early stage of the automation adoption compared to other regions. We know that the interest is growing, but the overall maturity remains significantly lower. One of the biggest challenges is that many providers in the region, they don't still fully understand the concept of API-driven transactions or the long-term business value that they create. And as a result, they often focus or their conversations are more into the amount of effort and resources that they require to implement these integrations rather than the scalability, efficiency, and commercial opportunities that automation enables. That's why we believe the industry immediate focus, especially in this region, should be on business APIs. We think that those are the APIs that create the most immediate and measurable business value. They allow providers to automate qualification and quoting, increase transaction volumes, even improve customer experience, and they will build the foundation for a broader ecosystem participation. And we think that before we can fully realize the benefits, at least in the region of operational APIs, we need a broader adoption of the business APIs across the ecosystem. Once the foundation is in place, providers will be in a much stronger position to automate delivery, assurance, and multi-provider coordination, which will ultimately support the next generation of NaaS and AI-driven services.
Yeah, excellent points about the migration. Devesh, you've got global perspective, but also you've been involved in the APAC Executive Council. What do you see in terms of the trends there, and maybe some of the things that you're hearing back from that particular region or
Yeah, so
Southeast Asia?
yeah, in Southeast Asia. Yeah, so I mean, first of all, we've got 4 or 5 of those APIs certified by Mplify last year. I think the most, even in this region, I think the heavily used ones are address validation, quote, product order, inventory. Mainly the quote and address validation are very heavily used. So those 4 we got certified last year. We're also seeing requirements in the region for trouble ticketing APIs and for performance monitoring. Performance monitoring is also very popular because, once the order is placed, they would like to see if anything circuit going down or what's the utilization on it, and that all goes under the the operational layer of the API. So those are primarily the drivers in the region. I would also say that there have been requirements for, enriching the current API. So for example, I give you like ordering API, right? So it's not just about placing new orders. It's like, if you are able to delete or cancel an existing order, can you upgrade an order? Or even expedite it, right? So most of our orders normally, DC to DC or on net, they are instantaneous. So I mean, you place an order and it's delivered, but not so for the edge, right? So last mile orders that are, we call them edge port, would take some, truck roll to implement. And so there are instances where customers are requesting us for, let's say, including an expedite order, where we could expedite the provisioning, or order milestones, where you could say, where in the process are you in, bringing up that line that was ordered a week back or maybe a few days back. Performance monitoring, trouble ticketing, actually, I think they're more to do with end-to-end monitoring. Some of the business partners that we have, upstream providers, they want to have a full visibility, and then so they would be using these APIs multiple times to just make sure that the circuit is up and running. So I think those are the key drivers. In terms of payloads, I think it's layer one is getting popular because of AI workloads going into the edge. So we could talk about that as
Well,
well.
you're jumping ahead to the next
Okay.
topic.
Oh, all right. Yeah.
Good setup. But you make an important point, particularly like your comment on order, right? So it's not just alignment on a particular function, but then you've got these areas
Yeah.
where basically, subsets, right? Where you
Subsets
can
under the same API, but yeah, more use
yeah.
cases under that same. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very good point. So, the next layer is payloads, right? So if LSO APIs basically provide the lifecycle envelopes for quote, order, inventory, etc., right? Payloads really define the specific product or service being described, quoted, ordered, or managed. So this slide shows the payload landscape in terms of the standardization status, what's standardized today within Mplify, formerly standardized are what's listed in the green, um, and work that's in progress, right? So we have activity within the Mplify communities around these different ones here listed in work in progress, and then also what's exploratory. Now that doesn't mean, getting back to the point I think was mentioned earlier, these LSO APIs can be used for a variety of payloads. I think, Greg, you started that discussion. So it doesn't mean it has to be fully standardized, right? So we can have these APIs being used across the board here, and that's what's shown in our LSO solution provider matrix. But let's just go into this a little bit. This distinction matters because payload maturity is one of the factors that determines how quickly LSO automation can scale across the different categories, right? So, Michael, looking at this landscape, how should providers think about that relationship between standardization and implementation momentum? And any other thoughts you want to make regarding
Yeah,
that?
just I guess aligning on different LSO APIs and processes is one level of how to reduce the time to onboard different partners and interoperate with them. And even to Devesh's point, aligning also on the features of those individual processes. Like, there's many features in order, as we mentioned. But another level is to align on the payloads, right? And so if you don't align on the payloads, you then have to go through a process of aligning on a bilateral basis. Now, that's extra work, that's extra maintenance. You have to come up with you have to look at the seller's payload. Say if you're a buyer, you have to look at the seller's payload and say, how do I map this into a standardized interpretation of that payload? Because ultimately, I need to know what I'm buying is the same apple as I'm buying from the other provider, so I can compare apple to apples rather than apple to oranges. And this is what you get from LSO, using LSO standard product payloads, basically. You shorten that time for onboarding, but you also get that consistency of being able to send a single request to multiple potential suppliers and figure out which one you're going to ultimately move forward with. Um, I think that's really the thing. And we have the main ones are Carrier Ethernet, dedicated internet access, and broadband internet access. These are definitely what we're seeing in the market. It started around Carrier Ethernet, but internet access has become very popular, obviously from the popularity of SD-WAN and SASE, combining the sort of the private line with the internet type services as well there.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's probably worth adding here at this point, when you talk about federation, right? Like what we covered at our Lisbon summit for the members, we introduced the topic of federation and the importance of alignment around the payloads, standardized payloads. It's really key to being able to scale that over time, right? Especially when you introduce agentic AI and so forth. So, John, you've got a lot of experience in the US market. How do you see the payload activity evolving and what obstacles need to be overcome there?
Yeah, yeah. So we are heavily U.S. focused. We're active internationally as well, but the U.S. is our home market. And so some of the things that we see with respect to payload standardization, and I do think that is the key to this whole thing and being able to scale it. Some of the things we see is traditionally in the U.S. some of these products that you have on the list here have been standardized via the ASOG standard. Some of them, like broadband internet access, have not. It's just been, non-standard. Each carrier that sells it essentially has their own way of selling it. And so it's been a mix in the US to the extent that the LSO standard helps to pull all that together into one way of doing business. It could be tremendously helpful to the carriers. Um, the some of the challenges we see um, is that the carriers are looking for automation, but also for simplification. Okay, and so I think the in terms of, especially on the broadband side, in terms of using LSO to order broadband, um, it's a relatively simple product. Um, and when they use each other's portals, there's only a few things. It's a relatively simple process. But with respect to the API-based integration, there's a lot more complexity in it. So there's this difference between what they're used to from a portal perspective and all the different data points that they have to provide in order for the API to work. So I think that's a challenge that we should look at. And then more broadly, as I mentioned earlier, each of the carriers has their own internal ways of doing business and those business processes are pretty much set by the legacy systems that they have in place. And sometimes they feel the need to expose some of that differentiation to their customers, the interfaces, including in some cases via the way that they implement APIs, including the LSO APIs. So we're starting to see a variation there from a payload perspective because some of the carriers need additional fields in order for their internal systems to work properly. So I would say those are some of the findings that we see and some of the challenges for a standardization body. How to make it work across the board is always tricky.
Okay, good. So I've got a little bit more time on this payload topic. I do want to leave us some time to talk about agentic LSO and MCP because that really came up at our Lisbon summit. But Devesh and Greg, maybe if you could kind of close us out on what you're seeing in terms of payloads, and then we'll move on to the agentic LSO topic.
Yeah, so just quickly, I think so currently PCCW Global is offering at least I think 6 or 7 of those payloads that you've listed here: carrier Ethernet, internet access, wavelength, IPVPN, all of them, Cloud Connect. Actually, we contributed the GCP, AWS, and Azure Cloud Connect stand to make Mplify standard. We've been actually deploying that for the last 2, 3 years already. IP peering, I would like to just add, we have a process where we actually allow customers to come in and declare if they have a private or a public ASN, and then we have a way of automating through APIs to onboard a tier one or a wholesale IP transit as well. So those are the important ones that I see that customers are demanding of us, and we have quite a lot of those are already integrated on our platform. Going forward for this year, I think wavelength, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be a key one. A lot of requirement for layer one, layer zero wavelength payloads.
Okay, layer zero. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thanks. Greg?
Yeah, and from our perspective, we build these Mplify models in our catalog and provide them as a set of resources for our customers to use, and promote them as a best practice. But ultimately, we see a lot of cases where payloads differ from the Mplify standards for various reasons, and we think it's important to embrace that and support carrier specific attributes and carrier specific definitions, and that's just a reality as different organizations seek to differentiate themselves, also as different innovation comes to bear or different vendors are being used by the carriers to implement the services. We're seeing that need, and we'd love to see a library of payloads built out that's broader than just the best practices that Mplify publishes.
So you sort of see a marketplace evolving where it's LSO enabled and potentially
Absolutely.
much broader. Yeah. I mean, one of the charts I saw from a LSO solution provider literally had dozens. I mean, we've got I think 24 here, but I think it even extended beyond this, what they were intending to use the APIs to support. So yeah, it's an interesting point of discussion.
I think ultimately what the way this should work, at least where we're headed with our customers, is when they want to buy a specific product. And they buy the product and they don't care what's on the back end. How from any of their suppliers, they buy that specific product the same way. And that's what a solution provider should enable, right? And on the sell side, it's the same thing. They're selling a product, they're selling their product, and their customers should not have to worry about the specificity of that particular carrier's internal processes or product naming conventions or payloads or whatever. That's what the solution provider is there for, to fix for them, right? And so that's where I think that's to really simplify this place. It just needs to be product based and a lot of translation going back and forth, because to the earlier point, carriers will differentiate themselves. They will have their own internal, processes and system. I'll call them limitations, but maybe they're not. They're just their own way of doing things, and that's not going to go away anytime soon.
All right, so I wanted to give us a couple of minutes. I know we're stretched on time here, but I did want to introduce this topic. This is kind of added, at the last minute because it really became a topic that came up at our Lisbon summit. This graphic here shows a simplified flow that helps frame what we mean by agentic LSO. The point is that not that AI agents replace LSO APIs. The point is that agents and MCP servers can create new interaction on top of standardized LSO workflows. So as Michael, I think you mentioned during our prep call, this is quickly becoming a hot topic as providers are looking to leverage the investments in LSO as they embrace agentic AI. So maybe Devesh and Michael, if you could kind of take us through your view on this issue of agentic LSO and where do you see things going?
Yeah. So what my take on this is basically, really what we are doing here is the LSO APIs that we've been talking about. They're all about automating our BSS and OSS processes. And now we bring in MCP server in the play. It basically opens up those processes to agentic workflow, right? So it's basically leveraging the capability that we are bringing out via standardized LSO APIs into the agentic realm. And so there's where MCP is playing a role. And by doing so, it kind of adds, abstraction layer where then you can actually have an LLM that you can intelligently using word prompts and English prompts converse with it, and in the back end all the complexity or all the heavy lifting is actually done by MCP, because you don't no longer when you're interacting with the tool using an agent, you're no longer worried about the LSO API schema or the payloads or the versions. That's all abstracted because now MCP is working in the back end to understand what the back end system is and what resources and tools it can deploy, right? So this is very quickly becoming the norm because you can see that all the agentic work is actually riding on top of either A2A or MCP. And I think we need to have we had a lot of discussion probably also in the Lisbon summit last week, where we are looking to see how we can bring this to the fore. And so basically, buyers or customers, how can they benefit from it? And basically we can provide functionality which is, it is easier or enable end-to-end quoting, ordering functionality across multi-domain complex interdomain architecture.
Good.
Yep.
And in terms of the AI, I think the key thing is like you've got a lot of power in AI. So, providers have quickly moved to try to see what they can do, what they couldn't do before using AI. So things like reworks, ordering a large number of circuits that are very similar. If you're using AI, an agent, an AI agent, those type of tasks become very easy to do using AI agents, basically. So we're seeing a very strong requirement now to at least expose MCP server, which is just another form of API, really, and very easily achievable. And then beyond that, even to expose agents, basically, both on the sell and buy side, so that they can talk to each other. I would say the A2A is still something that we need to work out within the Mplify community. We have to take into consideration the full picture, tokenomics, as we say. How much tokens are you going to use on an ongoing basis for something that maybe is achievable still through the APIs or over the MCP? But there's a lot of promise in this in making it even easier for providers to join in the ecosystem and unlock the power of the LSO standards, basically, within their own business.
Excellent. Well, with that, I think I've gotten the hook. We're out of time here. Tom's been carefully monitoring everything. So I just will leave you all with a closing slide with key takeaways. But as I share this here, I just want to thank the speakers. They're all LSO solution providers. They've all contributed to the matrix in the report, as well as read and provided comments. And I really just want to thank them for their role in the industry and helping drive things forward. John talked about simplicity. I think we talked about acceleration earlier. I think those combinations, simplicity, acceleration, customer experience, that's what it's all about. Really trying to drive much greater efficiency in the industry. So thank you all very much. Appreciate your time. And again, this webinar will be on demand afterwards, and you have an access to the report now if you're a member, and you can get the executive summary if you're not a member. And you can also purchase the report if you're not a member. So thank you all very much.